Okay, so I'm basically just continuing this painting from the last time. And usually I like to start off with a warm-up. But since this one is already halfway painted, or a little more than halfway painted, I figure I could just go ahead and finish it out and then move on to the next one. Now, since the paint on here is already dry, since it's been, I think, about a week, I have to be careful about how I layer the rest of the colors. So first I'm going to reinforce some of the shadows, and so I'll start off with the neck, or actually I'll start off, since I'm left-handed, I'm gonna work in reverse, or from opposite, from right to left. So I'm just gonna go ahead and create a little bit of a definition here for the shadow, the cast shadow from the hat, and then a little bit here. Basically reinforcing some of those darker spots, and then what I'll do is, while they're still wet, I'm just going to wet my brush and then fade out the colors upward and kind of use that to create more of a nuance with the softer shadows. I'm gonna rinse my brush again and then just slowly kind of building out kind of like softer, but still continuing to build up the skin tones, because there's a lot of variance in the skin tones, and I don't want it to be too light, but I don't want it to be too dark. And doing this little by little helps me really control kind of the tone and the appearance. And I'm gonna fade this out a little bit because I don't want it to be too different. A little bit here, maybe a little bit of a highlight right there, a little bit of, and kind of try to pick and choose where I leave the highlights. Definitely fade this out a little bit, like that. There we go. And then rinse my brush. And for the eye color, I want to go ahead and mix up a kind of like a dark brown eye color. So I'll just use what I already have, along with a little bit of phthalo blue. I'm just gonna mix them together, and I do want it to be much darker. I may add a little bit of red. This is obviously, it looks more like a neutral gray, like a really dark neutral gray. So I'm just gonna mix in these colors, and I always like to have my little test sheet on the side, slowly moving the hue, shifting it towards the dark brown that I would want for the eyes. So you can see now this is much darker, more like a dark brown, but I wanted to have a little bit more red in it. One really good way to create a really strong dark brown is mixing teal or blue-green with red, but that often gives you kind of like a neutral gray, or kind of like an organic black that's too strong. That's what I use for the hair on a lot of different parts in the hair. So with this color, see, this kind of looks like a dark brown that you would see in somebody's eyes. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay in that color, but I want to be careful. So I'm going to lay in the color more in the upper half of the pupil, basically, and then I have to be mindful of where there's a reflection from the glasses. So now I'm just going to rinse my brush, and then with the wet brush I'm just going to kind of pull out that color a little bit. And the reason being is is that there's a diffusion effect that happens in the eye because it's a clear sphere that has color in it. And so that's kind of what I did here, where I just faded it out towards the bottom. And now what I can do is I can really start pushing the contrast both in the clothing, in the hair, and the hat. And what that'll do is it'll help create more dimension. And if anybody has any questions at any time, feel free to ask. I look up from my screen every so often. And so now what I'm doing is I'm just getting the teal color just straight from the palette. And I'm going to reinforce some of these shadows. So first I want to establish a little bit of a thin line here for the seam of the hat, like that. And then a little bit here at the bottom. And then really just going heavy back here. I'm imagining that the light source is from the upper right. I'm gonna do a little bit here, kind of like this. And I don't want it to be overwhelming, but I do want it to be a very strong shadow. The stronger shadows help to convey the idea of being outside, maybe like a strong diffused or contrasting light from the sun, depending on where the person is located. And so fading out those marks while they're still wet with a wet brush, like that. And then I'm just gonna leave that as it is, and then move into the clothing. So I'm just gonna grab some purple. I'm gonna mix a little bit of the purple with the teal color. I really like using teal to darken colors, or especially if they're in creating a shadow, because shadows tend to be a cooler hue of the original color. And you'll see when I start laying this down, it creates a really nice contrast. But you can tell it's the same color, just darker. And so I'm just gonna make some marking like this. Sometimes I like to press my brush up against the paper just to create that nice texture like that. And it doesn't always have to be faded out, especially if I want to convey kind of like an expressive nature to the shadow like this, where you can see the brush marks. Up here around the color, I am going to fade it out a little bit, like that. A little bit like that. Rinse my brush. Still trying to keep in mind where the light is coming from. So more of the darker color on this side and a little bit lighter on that side. Like that. Here underneath the collar, just to emphasize the shadow. Same here. And maybe over here for the suspender a little bit. And rinse my brush. Hi there, Mango D2B. How's it going? I hope everyone's staying warm, being as how the weather's quite frightful outside. I decided to do some live streaming today. And the next thing I want to do is, so using the teal that I have here, I'm going to grab a good amount of red. I'm going to mix it in to create some of that neutral dark color. I'm going to grab some teal, some more red, like that. And I'm going to start putting more emphasis of the contrast in the hair. And so a little bit up here, just a line, just a very slight line, just to kind of create some definition. And then down here like that. And you can see I'm basically trying to pick out where the darkest points in the hair and adding some of that texture to create further contrast, which really helps create the idea of 3-dimension. Like that. Hi there, Pyramid Kid. Thank you, I appreciate that. Hopefully you're staying warm. I don't know where you're located, but it's the weather here is not favorable. I'm just gonna add a little bit here, like that. Also just a little bit, just to create a definition of where that hairline is. Chicago, and it's terrible. Oh no. Well, I hope you stay safe, and maybe do some watercolor painting. That's what I usually like to do when it's snowy outside. I'm just gonna do a little bit of this. Like that. I'm gonna rinse my brush. And then fade out some of the marks like that. Not too much though. That's pretty good right there. And I'm almost done with this one before I move on to the next one. What I want to do is I do want to create a little bit of the idea like there's a little bit of a shadow in the glasses, but it's very hard to do that, and if I mess it up, well, I'll just move on to the next one. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a little bit of the hair color that I mixed and basically dilute it so that it's just a really faint gray that I can kind of overlay. So let's see, that's probably good enough, and it'll look something like this, where it's basically a mark that I go like this and try to follow the curvature of the glasses, but don't interrupt the highlight. So you can still see the color underneath. There we go, like that. Now, these marks will dry lighter, so it'll actually help look better once it's dry. But for the most part, this is kind of how I want it to look. Now, I can always go in with an ink pen. This is probably my favorite ink pen to use for watercolor painting, just because it's waterproof and it has a really nice fine point. So what I can do is I can maybe do a little bit up here, a little bit back here. I'm just gonna move this like that. I could add some texture if I wanted to in the hair, maybe a little bit of squiggles here and there, just to show the curliness. Maybe in the frames, just on the bottom, kind of outline a little bit. Like that. Maybe a little bit here, just some more definition. And usually I try to keep it loose just so that it doesn't look too structured, but maybe adds to the image. Something like that. And I think this looks good. I don't feel like I need to add, like, for example, these are some of the previous ones from previous live streams. Like, you can see I added a background here. This one I didn't add a background just because I felt like it was very dynamic and interesting, This one I added a background. So it's, I like how this one looks without a background, so I'll just leave it as is. And then I'll move on to the next one. Like that. And with this one, let's see, I gotta bring my palette back up. Kid Cudi. I guess it does look like Kid Cudi. I didn't even think about that. That's a good point. I normally just kind of, I have a sketchbook of people, and I often just kind of sketch people that I see in everyday life, and I just kind of like remix them. And I think this was a gentleman that I saw in a coffee house, so I decided to add the headphones and the glasses. Thank you. So with this one, I wanted to, actually let me switch out my little dish, soap dish here. I like using soap dishes because they're perfect for mixing color. And with this one, what I think I'll do actually is, I'm gonna use this angle brush to try to make the marks a little more expressive. And so I'll start off with just grabbing a good amount of a base skin tone. And what I'll do is I'll start blocking in the shadows. And I'll probably keep the light source the same as the previous one, where it's just kind of like from the upper right hand side. Hey there, Moonbell, how's it going? And it's been a minute since I've used an angle brush, but I've been really wanting to try doing a more expressive painting. So if it turns out terrible, please forgive me. But basically what I'm doing is I'm using the very saturated colors here to just kind of establish where it's a little darker. And then I'm gonna rinse the brush and then just kind of pull out some of those colors. Like that. And you see I'm using the point a lot to just kind of get in to where it's a little finer of a detail. And I'm gonna grab some more of the concentrated paint, and I'm just gonna kind of outline the cheekbones, but a little bit, not too much. A little bit here, like that. A little bit here where on the left side of the nose, on the ridge, kind of like, I'm not worried about the paint going into the hair because it's going to be a dark colored hair that I'm just going to go over. And just kind of slowly trying to sculpt out the shadows. Maybe a little bit down here, not too much. Like that. And now I'm just going to rinse my brush. And then I'm just going to pull out some of those skin tones, like that. Trying to keep in mind where the highlights are. This brush is more for acrylic or gouache, but I like using it to create those brush marks. Like that. A little bit here. Sometimes it's good to challenge oneself with a brush that you're not used to, just because it'll make you step out of your comfort zone. A little bit up here, like that. And then pull out more of the color here. A little bit like that. And I'm trying to maintain just a slight amount of paint on the brush so that it's so I can always layer more on top and not overdo it. Because if you put too much, it just makes it difficult to remove with watercolor. I'm just gonna fade this out like that. There we go. Just making it look a little more painterly. And while building that out, I can always add a little more. There's still, like down here, there's areas where I can see that the paper is still a little wet, but I can use that to my advantage to create kind of like softer marks. And I like this technique. Some people have difficulty letting go with watercolor and letting it kind of do its own thing. So this is a technique that's kind of like maybe a little easier, just because you're kind of building the brush marks on top of one another little by little. Almost like sculpting, not really, but when you do it a couple of times, it becomes very intuitive. Like that. Maybe fade this out a little bit. Like that. Just create like a nice shadow defining the jawline. Maybe fill in a little bit over here like this. Grab a little more color. And it's kind of just developing a feel for it, really. And going back and forth like that and kind of like removing some, adding some, helps kind of get a feel. I'm gonna need more of this color. And just kind of like adding it back here. Like that. And then over here, towards the back of the head, that's further away from the light source. Oh, I almost forgot. I had to put color in the ear so it doesn't look out of place. Like that. And just slowly building that out. I'm gonna rinse my brush and then kind of pull out some of that color with a wet brush, and always keeping in mind that the watercolor dries much lighter, and then I can always go back, reinforce some of the details with a darker contrast color, and add a little more in here like that. And I'm just gonna give this a little bit of a break, and I'm gonna rinse my brush and then move on to the hair. I'm just gonna let some of this dry so then I can go back. For the hair, I'm just going to use red, and I'm using a lot more paint. That's another thing that I like with the brush, with a short brush like this. Super chill. Nice. I'm glad to hear that. So I'm getting more paint, less water, and then grabbing some teal, and then these two colors combined will create a really nice, strong, dark, almost like a Payne's gray. The black color that I have. The black color that I have right here, that's a ivory black, and but I want it to be a little less synthetic, so having a little more warmth to the color helps it look more organic, the way that hair color would. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna start making like kind of like strong textured brush marks. I'm pressing down against the paper a little bit because I want some of that texture to show, like that. Which kind of helps create that texture in the hair. And using some of the tip here on some of it. And then while these brush marks are still relatively wet, I'm just gonna wet my brush and then help pull out some of the color. But you can see it creates a nice faded effect, but still maintaining the texture. Like that. And creating some more texture here for the hairline. And rinsing my brush again. Like that. And rinsing my brush again, and then fading it out even further as I get to the edge of the right side. Now you can see that there's a little bit of a hint of red because of how I mixed the colors, but that helps with kind of like that organic feel. It doesn't look synthetic, it looks more organic, and that's really the only way I can think of to convey that. I'm gonna add, now I'm using a lot of paint and almost no water to just really create more texture in the darker part of the hair. Like that. There we go. There we go. And the fact that I'm using this brush, which I'm not as used to, and like I really like using pointed round brushes like these two, but using a brush that I'm not as used to actually forces me to create more textures and more unusual brush marks, which can be helpful with kind of creating a feeling of more like a painterly, more expressive painting style. And I'm going to rinse my brush now. Let's see. Sometimes I have to test the brush after I've rinsed it to make sure that all the color is out of it, especially if I'm using more paint, less water. Okay, that's good. Now for the shirt that he's wearing, I have to decide what color I would want him to have for the shirt. And let's see. So I'm trying to see if I can what I'll do is I'll go with a little bit more expressive. I'm gonna make the shirt is gonna be red flannel. Okay, or all right. Let's see. Let's do red flannel. Let's see. I like the challenge. That sounds like it's gonna be challenging. Red flannel. So first, I'm just gonna establish the base tone, just creating some. I'm just imagining where the shadows will be and just putting those in first. Maybe over here like that. And just wetting my brush and then pulling out some of those colors. Grabbing a little more paint, adding it over here. Rinsing the brush, using the color, or using the wet brushes to pull out the color like that. Okay. And now for the flannel part. Well, actually, what I'll do is I'll let this dry before I can go on top and add texture. And so in the meantime, I can actually go back in and add more detail for the skin tones. So I'm just wetting my brush, grabbing some paint. Thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been a minute since I've done a more textured painting like this. So I'm glad that it looks decent. So what I'll do is I want to add more definition here for the shadow of that's in the neck, just because he's got a very strong jawline. And just kind of adding a little bit of that painterly effect like that. And then also adding more shading towards the back of the head, like this, a little bit here, here, like that. And I try to be a little more careful with the second layer of shadows, just because obviously I can't, it's hard to remove paint once it's on a watercolor painting. So I try to be a little more light-handed on the second, third, and so forth with the layers. Okay, now I'm just gonna rinse my brush. I'm gonna pull out some of those colors, and I'm trying to be very cognizant of the angle of the brush. So like that. A little bit here underneath the nose for a cast shadow from the nose. A little bit here for the cheeks. Here, like that. Fade this out a little bit. Now, I do want to make sure that I have a shadow underneath the eyebrows because of the natural indent of the eye sockets. But I also have to remain cognizant of the glasses that are here. So, let's see. I'm gonna add a little more color down here like this. And so I'm just gonna do it very lightly. Like that. There we go. Now rinse my brush. What I'll do is I'm gonna wait a little bit because this is gonna dry lighter, and once it does, I can add some kind of like faint overlaid marks to create more dimension in the glasses. And in the meantime, I can go back into the flannel shirt. Now, let's see. So for the flannel, I guess I would have to add some squares and lines that would look appropriate. I'm gonna grab the color that I have here that's already pre-mixed. And so let's see, I'm gonna imagine, I'm gonna go like this. So I know that flannel usually has like a thicker line and a thinner line and some overlapping lines. Let's see, so I'm gonna go like this. And it's gonna be more expressive rather than accurate on the count of, I'm just kind of working off of memory. Oh yeah, no problem. Thank you for asking. Yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. It depends, it kind of varies. But usually no more than 5 minutes for the paint to dry, especially since I have like 3 different lights onto the I can actually feel the heat from the lamps that I have here, so it may dry even faster. If you're painting outside with in the sun, it'll dry even faster, like maybe 3 minutes, maybe less. But if you're just painting indoors, it may take 10, maybe even 15 minutes. Yeah, of course, you're welcome. Yeah, thank you for asking. So I'm just kind of trying to imagine how the flannel pattern would go. Hopefully I'm not butchering it too bad. Like that. Maybe something like this. The other side. And then kind of create an off-center marking for that. Okay, and then I have to do lines in the other direction. And I can always go in and add more shading and kind of, let's see, do you have a Discord? I don't actually. You know what? That's a good idea. I should make a Discord. I haven't used Discord in a while. That's probably a good idea. Thanks, Pyramid Kid. Wow, I forgot about Discord. I used to use Discord a lot. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if I have one and I just completely forgot about it. Under probably a different username. I forget if I ever made one for Wondering Watercolor. That's you know what? I'm gonna make myself a note here. Okay, it's great for streamers. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna make myself a note here. Check Discord. Thank you. I tend to get tunnel vision. Like I'm very focused on one thing at a time, and then I forget about other things. Okay, so I'm just gonna add more marks like this. This kind of looks like flannel, maybe not really, we'll see. And like that. I forget, can you stream on Discord? Or is it like just having the chat on Discord while streaming on YouTube? Is that what you mean, Pyramid Kid? The second one, okay. Just for chat while streaming, I gotcha. By the way, if you guys hear a kid making noise in the background, my wife's in the house, he's not alone. Yeah, it's a little, he's a year and a half. So, you know, he likes to make a lot of noise, exercise his lungs. So what I'll do is I'm just gonna wait for these marks that I made to dry. And in the meantime, I'll go ahead and I'll put some color into the headphones. And I gotta figure out, I think I'm gonna make the headphones orange. Just to stay on theme with, because this is a very warm painting, so I'm gonna maintain the warm colors. Now with orange, whenever I paint with orange, I tend to use a lot of paint just because it's such a light color and it dries much lighter. So I'm just gonna do this. And I'm not too worried about the details yet. I'm just kind of going over the overall feel of where the shadow falls, and just maybe like that. Do a little bit of detail. I'm gonna rinse my brush and add a lot of water, and then just kind of pull the water or the color out using the water from the marks that I just made. Like that. I rinse my brush again, and then so this is a technique that I like using for establishing the values very quickly. Also, if the background music is too loud, let me know. It's hard for me to gauge because the speaker is like pretty close to my head. And now I'll wait for this to dry. While this is drying, I can go ahead and focus on painting in the glasses. And so for the glasses, I can go ahead and just use the black straight from the palette without mixing it, so that it looks more synthetic, intentionally synthetic. I usually, whenever I'm painting like animals or plants or people, I try to avoid just using black straight out of the tube because it looks very manufactured. But in this case, since glasses are a man-made product, it'll actually look like it belongs. I'm just gonna move this to the side. Okay, and I'm using just the very tip of the angle brush just to be able to get those finer lines like that. Just very carefully. Like that. And I'm always tempted to rush, but I have to remember that sometimes I just need to go slower. There we go. And then definitely more on this side, going back behind the ear. Like that. And then I'm going to rinse my brush a little bit so I can create some variance in the color of the glasses, because I don't want them to be just pure black. I do want to show that there's a little bit of light, which causes some of the color to be lighter, like that. And I just realized I should probably make a mark back here for the other handle, going back like that. There we go. Rest my brush, and maybe pick up some of that color. There we go. One thing that I should definitely maybe paint in the lips here, the way to mix the color for that is, usually I just use the same color as the skin tone, adding some red in it. But getting the right ratio is a little tricky, so that's why I always like to have my trusty scrap piece of paper here. Let's see. So this is probably a good color. The orange color pick came out awesome. Nice, thank you. Yeah, it's I'm going to add more shadow to it, but I really like how it came out for the first layer. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm putting in the reddish brown that I mixed just for the bottom of the bottom lip and the bottom of the top lip. And I'm gonna rinse my brush, and now just with a wet brush, I'm gonna fade out that color upwards. So it has a little bit of, so it's darker on the bottom, lighter on the top. So it looks more natural, like there's a curve to it. I might add a little bit here in the corner, like that. And then I'm just gonna let that sit as it is and let it dry before I do anything else to it. And so in the meantime, I can go back into the flannel. And what I'll do is I'll grab some more red. Oh, let me bring my palette here. I'm gonna grab more red. And then I'm just gonna grab a little bit of green. Since red and green are complementary colors, you can always use a complementary color to help dull and darken whatever color you're working with. So this is, yeah, that's a good shadow color. And I can just start overlaying, like for example, I can go ahead and add some shadow like this and create more dimension. Make it look more three-dimensional, I should say. Maybe a little bit underneath the headphones, here in the collar, like that. And then rinse my brush or add more water, and then just fade out some of that shadow color, like that. And definitely back here, adding a little more. And then adding more water to the brush, and then just pulling that out like that. And then you see how it immediately became more three-dimensional, adding that shadow. But because it's transparent, I didn't use so much paint that it blocked out the marks for the pattern, so you can still see the pattern. And so now I'm just gonna let that dry, and while that's drying, I can focus on the headphones. So the complementary color to orange, it would be blue, but in this case, I'm going to use purple because I don't want it to be the immediate opposite. I want it to be kind of like close enough so that it creates a little bit of a contrast in a shadow, but I don't want it to be too strong. Because if you use the immediate complementary color and you use a lot of it, it'll create a color that's way too neutral, and I want to be similar enough. So here, I'll show you what I mean. So when I add this shadow, it looks like it belongs. So because the color itself, it's basically like a variant of the initial layer, it looks like it's not out of place. I'm just gonna add more shadow here. Maybe outline some of the initial marks like that with the point of the brush. Like that. And then add water to my brush, rinse it a little bit, and kind of fade that out a little more. And I still try to have parts where you can see the very first layer, and those are more of the highlights, more of the color that's being directly affected by the light. Kind of like that. There we go. Rinse my brush, and I might actually use the same color here to make it look more like it's wrapping around his neck, because I guess I forgot to draw that in earlier. There we go. rinse my brush. I just realized though that I forgot to, whenever I was laying down the hair color, I forgot to put in the eyebrow color. So I just need to mix up a little more of the similar hair color. So I'm just gonna grab the red and then a little bit of the teal, or actually roughly the equivalent amount of the teal, and just mixing them together helps create that more organic looking dark color, like that. Actually, I might use some of this to add more texture, like that. Just using the edge, rotating the edge, creating some more brush marks. There we go. And so I'm just gonna rinse my brush lightly, test out some of the, there we go, some of the color here, and then go ahead and put in a mark for the eyebrows, but I'm just gonna use the kind of like the bottom half of the eyebrows. And rinse my brush and use the water to fill in the rest of the eyebrows, like that. So there's a little bit of variation. It's not just like a, it doesn't look like a marker was put in there. And the next thing that I do want to do is add some color to the eyes. The way that I'll do that is using the brown that I already have on my mixing plate. I'm just gonna go ahead and mix that up with the color that I used for the hair, like that, and then just test that out. And that looks pretty good. So kind of like the previous one, what I'll do is I'm going to add more of the color towards the top half of the pupils, like that, and very carefully just using that tip of the edge brush. I'm really more like dabbing it little by little as opposed to making brush marks. And then rinsing my brush almost completely, and then using the water to pull out that color towards the bottom of the eye, just to give it more of a three-dimensional look. There we go. And then once that's dry, I can go in and actually put in the black at the center of the eyes, or the pupils, I should say. And while that's drying, I can go ahead and, if I want to, I can do another layer of shading for the flannel. But I would actually, let me pick a color for the background. Usually whenever I use more of a texture look, I like to put in a background with brush marks that you can see, as opposed to blending them. So in this case, I guess it would look good with either like a faint green, or I'm gonna go with the cobalt blue. I think that'll be fine. And so let me do this. I'm just gonna clean up a little bit of space on my mixing plate here with my cotton rag. And then grab some of the cobalt blue. Like that. I need to use more water and more paint Normally, whenever I'm mixing up a color for the background, I like to make sure that I have a lot mixed up, just because there's a lot of area to cover. Also, once I get to this side, blocking in the background will actually make the highlights on his face and clothing pop a lot more. I picked cobalt blue because it's a little more neutral than the phthalo blue, so I think it looks better for backgrounds. Even though, because all the colors towards the front are very warm, it'll look, even if I use the phthalo blue, it would still look fine. It's just that I don't want the colors to be kind of like fighting one another. Okay, so now that I have like a good amount mixed here, I'm just gonna move my palette, and for this side I'm just gonna start making brush marks. So I'm gonna go careful right next to the edge, like that. And then intentionally press against the paper and pull upwards so I can create that nice texture here from the paper while making the background marks like that. And the background can be a little messier because it's not the focal point. Go like that. Grab some water. And keep in mind that even though the colors that I'm putting down right now are darker, they will dry lighter. There we go, like that. And I have two options. I can lighten up the background as I go towards the right, or I can keep it the same color. If I keep it the same color as this, it'll create more, it'll bring out the figure more towards the front. If I lighten it up, it'll look more consistent overall, but I want that contrast from between the face and the background. I'm just grabbing more of the blue, and then same thing, just continuing to lay down the color and blocking it out. Going a little more careful right next to the edge of the hair. If I go in a little bit, that's okay, it's not a big deal. Like that. Just kind of filling that in carefully, and adding more here. I'm skipping the inside of the glasses here just because I'll get back to that. I don't want it to be the exact same color as the rest of the background, just because I want to create a bit of a faded effect so that it looks like glass. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you like the blue. I'm gonna grab more of the blue, mix it up with some water, and then just continue. There we go. You can see right next to the image, I'm going very slowly and then very chaotic off to the side. There we go. Grab a little more here. Now you can see how the face just looks like it's lit up so much more. And if I continue to layer the blue on the background here, it'll do the same. It'll just look more and more contrasting. Like that. And now for that little space back here behind the glasses, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna rinse my brush, but not completely, so that there's a little bit of color that I can go ahead and put in. There we go. Rinse my brush. And so this image is pretty much done. I could go in and add some for the... Actually, what I'll do is I'll grab my my waterproof ink pen. And I'll go ahead and kind of feel a little bit just to make sure it's dry. And then I'm just gonna go in and add some detail with the ink. So first what I want to do is add a little bit for the glasses. Like that. And I don't want to do too much, but enough to kind of like punch up the contrast a little bit. You see, I'm going to add a little bit here for the eye, and then definitely a little bit in the actual pupil, like that. And you can see that little bit right there just makes it look so much more three-dimensional. A little bit of texture. Like before I add the same to the other eye, you can see the difference. Like just that little bit makes it pop so much more. There we go. Like that. A little bit of some sporadic lines here just for to create the texture. Like that. And then over here for the glasses. And maybe a little bit for the... So I have two options. Whenever I'm doing outlines, I can always use the ink pen, or I can also use just the pencil. So like for example, if I wanted to emphasize where the nostril is, I can make it stand out a little more like this. I could go in with the ink pen, but it'll make it pop out a lot more. Like over here for the lips maybe. And just go in. And definitely for the headphones, just some stronger lines, a little more chaotic. They don't have to be perfect. Like that. There we go. Now there is always another option when adding shadows with an ink pen. I always have the option to do a little bit, like for example, some hatching. Like I could do a little bit like right here. I could do a little bit on the headphones themselves, like that. It has to be consistent with how it looks and where it's placed, within like the shadows, kind of like that. It's not necessary, but it works either way. So okay, I'm pretty much done with this one. I could always go in and bump up the values a little bit in the face, but. So this is the first one that I did during this live stream, or I guess finished because I had started on another live stream. This is the second one, and the next one is actually going to be this one. So this one is let's see, I'm gonna kind of try to center it a little bit. Excuse me. And I'm actually going to put my palette down here, and I have to clean up my little porcelain dish, just because actually this one, I may be able to clean this one up quicker, because I only have 2 of them, and I'll leave this here for, since I just finished painting this one, I'll leave this here while I clean this one. And all I do is I just kind of like use my little spray bottle and just kind of clean that up with my cotton rag, just because it's quick and easy that way. There we go. So I'm just gonna put that to the side. Gonna flip this around. That's already messy. I'm just gonna grab a clean one for my color mixing. Put that down a little bit. There we go. So, okay, yeah, this is the first one I did. This is the second one during this live stream. Now it's gonna be this one. This one's gonna be kind of similar to how I painted this one from an older live stream. And basically, the idea is I'm going to build up the values by doing a wet on wet mixture technique to blend in the shaded parts with the light parts. And I'm going to show how I layered on the wrinkles and all that, step by step. Came out so alive. Thank you. I appreciate that, Moonbell. Thank you for saying that. This one is going to be different in how I paint it. It's going to be more loose, and a lot more water is going to be used. So that's why I'm going to switch brushes. So for this one, I'm going to use the quill brush. And the reason I like these brushes is because they hold a lot of water. So you can do wet on wet mixture techniques very easily. And so the first thing I'll do is, actually, I'm gonna switch this back so people can see how I mix my colors. People often ask questions about skin tone mixing. Now there's 2 ways that I like to do skin tone mixing One of them is, I have this color right here, which is called Coral Reef, and it's a Daniel Smith. This is an entirely Daniel Smith watercolor paint palette, and this is what it looks like. It's a good base tone for skin tones, and I use that if I'm sketching and I'm trying to be quick. It's kind of like a little bit of a cheat. That way I don't have to worry about mixing the skin tones on the go if I'm like out and about. But since I have time here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix the skin tone from scratch. And the way I'll do that is basically a mixture of brown, pink, orange, and red. I'm just going to play around with the ratio of all of these. So for him, I'm imagining that the light source is coming from the upper left-hand corner. And first I want to mix my skin tones on my mixing plate before I start painting, and I want to make sure I have enough. So I'm adding water first, and then I'm grabbing some brown. And the brown, the specific brown that I'm using is called English Red Ochre, for anyone curious. It's a very good base color for mixing, well, really anything. I really enjoy using it. I think that's one of the most used colors that I have. Then I'm gonna grab some red. And so you can see it already kind of looks like a peachy color. So like this would be a good base tone to use for the skin. But I am going to add a little bit of orange. The reason being is adding a little bit of orange to the mixture just gives it more dimension, makes it look more lively, I guess. And so now that I have all of that mixed, I'm actually gonna put this brush here to the side for a moment. I'm gonna use my bigger brush, and I'm gonna make sure that it's filled with a lot of water. And then wherever there's skin, I'm basically just going to add water. And I'm gonna avoid the eyes. I'm just gonna paint right over the eyebrows, so that's not anything to worry about. And I'm just kind of adding all of this . Okay, a little bit here for the ear, and maybe a little bit here for the lips. And I'm just gonna leave that as is. I'm gonna go ahead and grab the color, and then the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to just add it on this side, and I'm adding it much heavier on this side, and you see how the color starts to pull out, and that's what we want. So definitely more color in this area. Maybe a little bit up here, like that, and then a little bit down here. And the next thing that I'll do is I'm gonna grab some yellow and put it on this side. Maybe a little bit here, a little bit where the cheekbone is. And so you're creating an intentional blend of the two types of color because of the wet paper underneath. I'm gonna add a little more here, like that. And now I'm just gonna rinse my brush and pick up some of those colors where I want there to be more of a highlight. Now I can always go in and add second layers and third layers of shadow, but I want the initial layer to have this general feel. I'm gonna add a little more here, like that. Gonna rinse my brush and then kind of fade out some of that color a little more. And even though these colors look very strong right now, they will dry much lighter. And since there's a lot of water here right now, I'm just gonna let it dry. And in the meantime, I'm gonna focus on adding some color here for the arm. And the way I'll do that is I'm just gonna grab some cobalt blue and a little bit of the brown or English red ochre. Creates a nice blue-gray, and I'm just gonna go like this. I'm just creating the shadow, and I'm gonna add more blue on the marks that I just put down, like that. I'm gonna rinse my brush, and then use the water to just kind of pull out some of that color, like that. Mixing it in. I'm gonna rinse my brush. I'm gonna add more blue because I really like how the blue looks in this mixture here. So I'm just gonna add more blue here. And kind of let it looks like a faded blue because of how much gray there is there. Like that. Create a little more fading. I do want the brush marks to show though. I like how the texture of the paper shows through. And then for the clothing, this guy has like a little bit of a vest, so I'm gonna grab some purple. And I'm actually gonna mix this purple with some brown just to neutralize it somewhat, but also a little bit of the teal. So it's kind of like a grayish purple. And then put that in here. I'm intentionally letting the colors bleed into one another. I want this painting to have a more loose feel. Like that. And then I'm just gonna rinse my brush and then pull out that color like that. I'm gonna rinse my brush completely and then dry it off, and then remove some of that color like that. There we go. I'm gonna use the same color mixture for the hat, and the way that I'll do that is I'm just gonna add more purple, more teal, and a little bit of brown, because it'll give it that nice faded look. A little more teal, a little more purple. I always have to gauge if I want more paint or more water to determine how much of the white of the paper I want to be showing through. Here we go. And now I'm just gonna go in, trying to avoid where the skin tone is because I don't want it to blend in. So I'm adding that in here. A lot of paint, less water to establish the darker values. Like that. So you can see how it's starting to run into the skin tone a little bit. I'm actually gonna leave that alone for right now because I'm not too worried about it. I'll go like this. I'm gonna rinse my brush and then just pull out the rest of the color. Like that. Okay. And I'm gonna use my small brush to remove that little bit that bled in. I am going to use a darker mixture to kind of cover that up, but it's not a problem that it shows up so much. There we go. And then for the beard, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mix up a gray color because the rest of the painting's pretty wet, and I want it to dry a little bit before I go back in to add shadows and detail. So for the beard, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some of the brown and then cobalt blue, because together they make a really nice neutral gray. And I don't want it to be too strong of a gray, but I want it to be enough to where I can convey where the shadow is, just slowly, like that. And I'm trying to imagine how the texture of the beard looks, and then just adding some of those marks to convey that texture. The brush marks are a little more chaotic with this, and then I'm just gonna rinse my brush. So now there's just water on the brush. I'm gonna pull out some of that. Here for the beard, and then rinse my brush, and then pull that up. Like that. Picking up some of that excess just to fade it out further. Rinse my brush. Now I can switch to my smaller brush. And what I'll do is I'll start establishing the darker values in the skin. So first, I'm just using the exact same mixture. Emphasize back here first and foremost, like that. Just want the shadows to be very dark because there's a lot of water in this mixture, so it'll just look much lighter once it's dry. And then here for the eye, for the inner part of the eye where it's much darker, and then kind of maybe some of the wrinkles, outlining them. And carefully picking where exactly I want these dark marks to be, because I do like the way that the colors look for the first layer. Nice. Maybe a little bit here. A little bit here. Definitely for the nostril, I wanted to kind of show a little more, and then I'm just gonna rinse my brush and then fade out. And now I can also make lighter marks for the wrinkles further away from the darker part. Also, what I want to do here is I'm going to cover this eye with the same color. The reason being is it'll dry lighter, but you'll see once I add in the details, it'll look more realistic. I am going to pick up some of that color, like that. And I'm also gonna fade in some of that color like this. And then choosing where I want the colors to be directed as I fade them out, and where I want there to be further defined edges because of the wrinkles, or if I want them to be faded in like that. And for the nose, I'm just gonna add a little more here on the tip, and then fade that out. And just slowly picking and adding color where I want there to be more. Like, for example, I want the cheek to be a little more defined, so I'm just adding more color to the bottom here, and slowly kind of emphasizing the highlight here by building up the darker values around it. Like that. Back here for the ear. Rinsing my brush, and then kind of fading that out, rinsing my brush, drying it, picking up some of that color. There we go. I'm gonna grab some of the darker purple and then start adding some of the detailing here. I'm gonna get more purple, grab some teal, and this time I'm going to start making a lot darker marks, since pretty much the base colors are already established. And maybe a little bit of the edge here in the beard, show that through a little more. There we go. Just create some definition here. Usually with the second, the third, the fourth layer, I slowly build out just the details and decide where I want there to be just more value or just contrast, and doing it kind of step by step like that helps maintain control and really decide what you want to emphasize. Here we go. Maybe show some of the folds, not going overboard, but just kind of thinking of where the shadows are, where the folds are, how I want the texture to look. And then rinsing my brush. There's still a little bit of paint on the brush, but I want to fade out some of those edges. I don't want them to be so definitive. There we go. And then creating more textures. And then I can also go back in and add a different color to overlay and add more variety. I'm still thinking whether or not I actually want the goggles to be painted in. I kind of like how they look just as a sketch. I'm gonna add a little bit of color here for the little flap. And now I'll go ahead and I'll focus more on the face and the details in the face, establishing the darker values. I'm gonna grab some more of the brown. Grab some red. I'm gonna test that out here on my little test sheet. I need a little more red and also a little bit of orange to really get the nice skin tones. And I don't want it to be too light because I'm starting to build up the shadows now. So what I'll do is I'm gonna start laying down these shadows here like that. And really starting to emphasize the wrinkles. I really like painting older people just because there's so much character in just in their expression, and then the textures of their faces is probably one of my favorite things to paint. And if you get it right, you can really express that, you know, that they've had a long life. And I always like to imagine maybe what's happened, all the stories. And then just really carefully trying to really kind of create that contrast. Creating the contrast in the skin is difficult because most of the skin tones are very soft, and building them out is it's a bit tricky. Like down here, for example, I want to add a line like this and create a little bit of to show that there's a curve to the cheek, but I also want to fade it out. I don't want it to be just a straight curve. So fading it out like this should help. And then a little bit here. And just kind of slowly building out the values. Like the nose, I wanted to have more shading in it, but I don't want it to be so much that it blends in with the back here. I do want to be able to show the highlights like that. A little bit here. rinse my brush. And I'm just gonna let this dry for now. I wanna go ahead and focus back in the beard and add more detail. So mixing the same neutral gray using brown and blue. Like that. A little more blue. I'm actually going to use just a touch of teal, just because it's a very strong color. And then a touch of red, because they neutralize each other really well. More water, just so I can work with the mixture a little more easily. And then a little more blue. There we go. That way it'll push it more towards the gray. There we go. And now I can start establishing more details and really bumping up the contrast. And sometimes, every now and then, I like to just do a mark where you can press against the paper and then just pull it out to create that textured brush mark. And then slowly adding some short, quick marks just to show the texture of the hair. And it's kind of a methodical, slow process, but part of the reason I like watercolor is it's actually relatively quick. In the moment, it might look slow, but it's definitely quicker than oil painting. And also, I'm going to use the mixture to add a little bit up here. For the eyebrows. Like that. Now rinse my brush, and then I'm just gonna fade out some of those brush marks and creating some texture and shadows with a different tone, with a different because it's still the same color, but I just want it to be lighter and still show the variety of marks. There we go. A little bit here. There. And rinse my brush. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to grab the brown and then really darken it up. I'm going to use some phthalo blue, maybe some red. Just I want it to be a very dark color for the eyes. And a little orange. Let's see. Some brown, some blue. It's basically a darker version of the color that I was just using. Let's see. I'll grab a little bit of brown. Okay, that's a really good dark brown. I like that a lot. And so the first thing I'll do is fill in this one same thing for this one. And I want to leave a little bit of a highlight. I'm kind of putting in the color in the upper part of the iris, and then rinsing my brush, and then fading down the brush marks to create almost like a three-dimensional feel of the sphere that's the eye. But I do have to wait for that to dry before I can add more detail, and also the pupil in the iris. I do want to grab, let's see, I'm going to grab a little bit of orange, and tell you why. I want to add this orange kind of in the background, or not the background, but the inside flap of the hat, just to give it, to show that it's a different color. And I'm also going to add a little bit of the same up here. Not too much. And a little bit down here. I'm going to rinse my brush. What that does is, because orange, it's kind of like a yellow orange and purple, they're basically complementary colors, so adding them in 3 different spots like that will create more warmth, but also balance in the image. And now I just have to pick a color for the background. For this one, I may use kind of like a pink and orange mix. Yeah, I think that'll look good. But it'll be faded. It'll be a faded pink and orange mix. Okay, yeah. So I'm gonna grab this. And I'll add brown so it can be a little more dull, so it's not as strong of a color. And because it's a light color, if I don't like how it looks, I can always remove it. Other than the skin in this image, everything else is pretty cool and in terms of color temperature. So intentionally adding this background makes it look more contrasting. Like that. There we go, like almost like he's outside in a desert or something. This part, I'm just gonna create some quick brush marks. I don't want it to be completely filled in. Just want to show some. There we go. Great to see you on live. Hey, hi there, Wishius. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but welcome. Yeah, the weather outside's not too good right now, so I figured maybe a little live stream and get some practice in at the same time. Thank you. Yeah, since you're just joining here, I'll show you the previous ones. So I started off, this was the first one I did during this live stream, and then this one, I was trying to show more like texture painting, and then this is just a mixture of loose and wet on wet techniques. And I'm almost done with this one. I think I'm gonna keep the the goggles as is. I may add some ink, but I think keeping them blank makes the painting look more interesting, just in my opinion. But I do have to add some details. For example, in the eyes, I'm just gonna use my ink pen, and I can see that this eye is still a little wet, so I should wait before adding that in there. But for the rest of it, like for example, for the goggles, I can go ahead and add a little bit. I just realized that this is a little wet. I just added a quick squiggle in the goggle here, just to give it that kind of like a reflective feel. There we go. And I'm just adding some outline to the goggles, and I'm going to add a little bit of outline to the face. There we go. And for the face, I do want to be careful with how I do the ink, because it can be overpowering and distracting. Basically, I just want to add a little bit for the eyes. And then the pupil itself, just kind of dabbing it. Like that. Okay, that actually looks pretty good. I think I'm gonna leave it as is because I'm worried I might mess up the eyes. I'm just gonna add a little bit of a outline here. And I really like doing watercolor and ink. I feel that they go together really well. And adding some texture in the beard. More towards the darker side of the beard, and then adding a little bit more sporadic texture towards the lighter side. A little bit here. Maybe some folds for the sleeve. There we go. Yeah, I really like how this one turned out actually. So let's see, the first thing that I painted during this live stream, or finished painting, was this one, and then this one, more textured watercolor and ink, and then this one more loose, wet on wet, kind of like blending. But yeah, I think that's it for now. And if anybody's got any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. See you next time.